Students, good morning. Today we are going to discuss the topic the scope and approaches in engineering ethics from the Unit 1 Engineering Ethics. So, what is actually the understanding of ethics? It is a study of moral principles and how they guide people's decisions and actions. Sometimes it can also be defined as the moral philosophy that explores how to live a good life, our rights and responsibilities, the language of right and wrong, and moral decisions. The respect to ethics is concerned with other people's interest, society interest, and God's interest. It guides people to tell the truth, keeping their promises, or help someone in need. So, the role of ethics in engineering. Some of the ethical decisions and moral values of an engineer need to be considered because the decisions of an engineer have an impact in the products and services, how safe they are to use, the company and its shareholders who believe in the goodwill of the company, the public and society who trust the company regarding the benefits of the people, the law which cares about how legislation affects the profession and industry, the job and its moral responsibilities, and above how the environment gets affected, etc. So these are all the important things to note about the ethics in engineering level. So let's have a clear understanding about engineering ethics. Engineering ethics, where ethics are implemented in engineering by the engineers, is necessary for the good of the society. Engineering ethics is the study of decisions, policies, and values that are morally desirable in engineering practice and research. An engineer, whether he works individually or works for a company, he has to go through some ethical issues. Mostly under the conditions are conceptualization of a product or issues arising in design and testing departments, or maybe on the issues involving the manufacturing, sales and services. So the questions related to morally also arise during the supervision and teamwork. So the scope of ethics. Here the scope of ethics is explained in twofold. One is at the workplace, another is related to the product or work. So when it comes to workplace, which involves the co-workers and employees in an organization, so with respect to the product or work which is involving the transportation, warehousing and use beside the safety of the end product and the environment outside the factory. So here the ethics of the workplace, it is completely internal. It has the features of confidentiality, which means an engineer discovers a colleague's mistakes that could compromise project safety. They must decide whether to report it, potentially jeopardizing their colleague's job. The second one is fairness. A manager favors promoting employees based on personal connections rather than merit. So an engineer must choose between speaking out or staying silent. Respect. An engineer witnessing harassment or discrimination towards a co-worker, they must decide whether to intervene or report to the incident to the higher authorities. So here the ethics related to the product or work, it has certain qualities and features. The first and foremost thing is safety. An automotive engineer, for example, discovers a design flaw that could lead to accidents. They must decide whether to notify the management or potentially delaying the production process. So the second one is environmental impact. You take an example of a chemical engineer realizes a new process will harm local wildlife. So they must choose between modifying the process or risking their job. Another case, product integrity. Take an example of a software engineer is asked to conceal vulnerabilities in a program. So they must decide between complying or potentially harming users. So the approaches in ethics are micro level and macro level. In micro ethics, which deals with decisions and problems of individuals, professionals and companies. For example, plagiarism, conflict of interest, honesty, data privacy, false advertising, testing integrity, intellectual property issues. Macro ethics, which deals with the societal problems on a regional and national level. Examples, climate change policy, AI regulations, education policy, trade agreements, income inequality, infrastructure development. So let us take an example. After recent collapse of a structure in which many people died, an engineer came to know about the bridge which is marginally safe. So he informed his superior who asked him to stay calm and not to discuss with anyone while waiting for the next year budget sessions to get some financial help for the repair required. What should the engineer do? Just have a think. In another example, what should an engineer who observes his colleague copying confidential information unauthorized do immediately? If he chooses to stop his friend, what if this gets repeated without this notice? If he chooses to report the management, what if his friend loses the job? So, which is morally correct? So, this is another question to think of. And the third example, an engineer who develops a prototype for the project loses it due to a mishap exactly the day before the submission. Is it morally correct to outsource the prototype of the project and reduce the risk of the job insecurity? What should he do? So, if you have to answer all these three questions, then you will come to know what is their moral responsibility and ethics. To the conclusion, these are the few examples we have seen just to understand the kind of moral dilemmas. So there might be one or more correct answers at times. There can be some other way around to deal with the issue which can't easily notice. However, the decisions have to be made by following a slow and clear process to in order to avoid further problems and also to solve this in a manner that leads to no regards. Thank you. Thank you, students.